Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sandeep Sharma. I'm a consulting and research professional with IDC. At the very outset, let me mention that this is not a professional video and has no relation whatsoever with my stint at IDC currently. This is merely an endeavor to give back to society through knowledge dissemination on themes such as education, healthcare, innovation, and other themes that are extremely relevant for our society today. Today, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome for a discussion Mr. Shibabrata Mondal, who is the founder and CEO of Wizergos. And we have his time today, and we want to discuss his entrepreneurship journey and the lessons for the student community. Let me just quickly give a brief introduction before we hear from Shiba, as we fondly call him. So every year, lakhs of MBA aspirants in the country scout for jobs primarily in MNCs. The MNC tag is a huge tag for the student community. The preference towards SMEs and lesser known startups is relatively insignificant. And we have seen that this pursuit of entrepreneurship by the student community has picked up slightly in the last 3 to 5 years or so. And because of the observable media attention for several founders. However, a lot remains to be done to motivate the student community to pull up their socks and have startups or be engaged with startups that have the potential of not only solving the short-term tactical concern of placements, but also the longer-term puzzle of value creation for the society. Now, having said this, it is very important for us to hear from the entrepreneurs on the ground and understand what has been their journey, what lessons can be imbibed by the student community. So with this backdrop, let me welcome on board Shiba for a conversation. Welcome, Shiba, to this conversation.
Thank you, Sandeep. It is always a pleasure talking to you. And I always enjoy talking to Sandeep because he's really, really insightful. He has a lot of insights into the industry, probably because of his profession. But it's great talking to you.
Thank you so much. These are very kind words. Thank you so much for these kind words. So Shiva, let me just ask you a very, very basic question. Please introduce yourself for the student community. Please tell us something about Wizergos and briefly about your academic and corporate career till now.
Right. So let me do that. But before I start, I also want to mention something. As such, the flavor of our discussion today is something of the nature of an advice to students, right? So I must say that personally, I'm not a big fan of giving advice because I think everybody must, especially if the advice is very prescriptive, because it is very different life journey and life experience for everybody, and everybody must figure it out for themselves. However, we can talk about what I have learned, and we can also talk about certain, high-level ideas or structure in which people could think about their career when they're starting out. But I would, of course, definitely request all the students who are going to listen to this to not take anything as prescriptive, because it is really, really different time, different geography, different experience, and you must go on a discovery yourself. After that, let me begin. So yeah, I grew up in a small town called Asansol, which is in West Bengal, in near Bihar border, and then I went to IIT Kharagpur, where I did my BTech in ECE, and then started working at different corporates. So first at Wipro, then I worked at Cisco. And after that, I worked in another startup called Veritant, which later on got acquired by ATST, which got acquired by Western Digital. So, and after that, I started on Wizergos. One is, of course, these, the students who are graduating from MBA school, they would today think of entrepreneurship as one of the options. During that time, which was more than 2 decades back when I graduated, it was not a very common thing. I mean, there were probably a few people who went in that direction, but the typical thing was, taking up a job. Of course, there is also the personal thing, that personally at what stage in your life, family, etc., that you are in, what are your personal finances based on which you can make that decision. So today I see that there are a lot of opportunities, and if somebody wants to take up entrepreneurship, definitely they should think seriously.
Sure, sure. So I would assume that when you started way back, I don't think that you thought of entrepreneurship any any day when you were studying yourself. Is that correct
Yeah,
to
it
assume?
was it was definitely it was definitely not right, right. It was definitely not seriously. I
Okay,
mean, we did used to have a discussion among friends that, if we do some, startup or company, then what would it be? And that they used to be based on our experiences of that time, right?
okay, sure.
I remember we used to have a lot of discussion about a company that we could build. And that was something that in today's world would be called edtech,
Sure,
education technology. That is probably because at that point in time, our life experience was, how to, crack the game of education, that how do you get into the good colleges and how do you get a degree and stuff like that. And so our all ideas about what you can do is really was that, right? Because
sure,
it will always be based on your experience. And of course, we did not do that.
sure.
And all of us went and, took up jobs and did what we did. And at much later point, I started Wizergos.
Okay,
Yeah, when I had a lot of years behind me, and my personal finances and all that also allowed me to take that decision. That is another critical thing that everybody should think. It is a very personal decision.
okay, okay. So you have mentioned about your journey from the corporate to your own startup. Could you
Right,
help us explain what was your motivation to start your own company? Because I think that is one particular aspect
right,
that the student community would definitely want to hear.
right. And like I said earlier, that the motivations would probably differ, right? So at
Sure.
that, let me first start with one theory that I have, right, about this. That what first of all, when you're thinking of starting something, there will be an idea that I want to solve this problem, or I want to work in this area. And that would be based on your experience, right? And so since this is now, let's say we are talking to the students, let's say of course, there could be MBA students who have worked in the industry for a while and then went for MBA. In their case, it would be different. Assuming a lot of the students have not worked in the industry, then if I think or of course, this is quite a common thing to think of, okay, there is a B2C company and there is a B2B company. Of
Right.
course, there is B2SMB company. Now, you would notice that typically the younger generation, younger people, they would go after a B2C problem.
Hmm.
And that is clear why that is. Because they are in their early 20s. The typical customers of their solution few years down will be who are late teens today to, let's say, 30, 35. That is where in India, young country, that is where most of the people who are early earners, beginning to earn, they are going to spend. Right? So they understand that sector. They understand, or they should understand, or they would feel confident about understanding a B2C use case, because is their peers would be the users, or they themselves would be the users mostly. Right now, our generation, we grew up in a socialist India, no consumerism, so those things are little foreign to us, right?
Mhm.
So we can't do that because we can't even figure it out that this is what people want. And that is why a lot of the new MBA students could actually potentially uh, take a B2C problem, because
Sure.
they can figure it out.
Sure.
The older generation who are starting a company in their early 40s or late 30s, they might have worked in the industry for long enough that they know a problem of the industry, or they know how to figure out a problem of the industry, because they have worked within the system and within the processes, and hence maybe a B2B, it will be their first choice, right? And that happened for me too, that when I started, I thought a B2B problem is the right thing, because
Mhm.
that was top of my mind at that point in time. Coming back to your original question of why I started, what happens is when you work in a large company, you are seen as an expert. and you are an expert of a certain field. Like in my case, it was engineering, right? So like building product and building teams. Those are the two things, right? That you are building a team and you are building a product. However, back of your mind, there are these things that, okay, there are many other things to do. And should I try it out? Can I do it? Those questions are there that you want to test yourself. You want to explore other things. And honestly, such opportunities you have to create for yourself. Nobody in the corporate world is going to hand over an opportunity to you in which you are not seen as an expert. That I will learn it. That is not going to work. It is that, okay, you are an expert in this, you keep doing this. That is what would typically happen. It was also a personal need to kind of explore other spheres of this professional life. That can I do sales? Can I do marketing? Can I do product management? And what are those things that, what are the important aspects of those things? And then of course you don't really know. You may think that I'm good at this and that, but once you start doing, you will figure out that naturally I can do this well, and I this other thing I have to really learn, and I have to work hard on it. When you move into entrepreneurship, especially if you move into it with a small team growing slowly, no big funding, no big teams, and you are doing it. And hence you learn that, or you'll explore and you'll figure out yourself that what you are good at and what you are not so good at. And that is fine. It is not necessary that you have to be good at everything. But for me, that was one of the key things, that I really wanted to explore other things, not just become an quote unquote expert of something that I have done forever. And that was the reason that I knew that kind of opportunity I cannot get within the big corporate structure.
Sure.
And hence this. And after that, it was about what to do, right? And what to do, like I told earlier, it is your life experiences at that time. So it was, let's say, B2B was one of the things, because I felt that is where maybe I will have an edge compared to a 20.
Sure.
And right, and of course, other things that personally you have to also decide that at your family, and what are your personal state in life when you want to do that.
Absolutely, Shiva. So, in fact, I think you have summarized the whole lot of my questions. You've given responses to all of my questions at one go. So
I
I
see.
wanted to I wanted to check with you on your motivation. I wanted to check with you on certain experiences of starting your own company. What kind of challenges or advice would you
Right,
like to give
right,
with regards to those challenges? So you've covered it all. Let me now, since you have mentioned some very, very interesting points. You talked about the young demographic dividend that India enjoys today. And
right,
we have also seen, and personally in my career as well, I have also seen a number of my friends, my colleagues jump companies because they were not satisfied with their current job role and responsibilities. This has nothing to do with
right,
monetary or any other compensation related factors. The shift
right,
has mainly because they wanted to do something much more meaningful and purposeful instead of just working for a 9 to 5 job. And so that is absolutely
right. See,
interesting.
if you
Yeah,
put right, right, if you put it in an Excel sheet and put some probabilities of your outcome, actually a job will always win.
absolutely.
As in, if you see how much money I will make and put probabilities and expectation, you calculate, a job will always win.
Sure,
So that cannot be your reason to make the decision. It has
sure,
to be few other things.
sure. Absolutely. In fact, the one other point that you highlighted, Shiba, and this is very, very important for the business school students as well. This is the idea of well-rounded education in management, and
Mhm.
that can be gathered through, let's say, on-the-job kind of experience that you gather from working in a startup or being engaged in a startup. A large company definitely has its own advantages and benefits, but if you're working with a smaller company, then you are doing product development, you're doing marketing, you're doing sales. Sometimes you're doing interviews as well. You are recruiting as well.
Right,
So this is
right,
end-to-end involvement across all different functions of a company, and the learning curve in this particular case is much steeper. So I think this is really useful for business school students. I just have one question for you at this point in time, and then we will wind off. So this question is with regards to the requirements, or what kind of expectations do you have when you recruit business school students? Do you look out for each of these qualities? What qualities do you look in for MBA school students? And would you be really happy if that person has worked in a startup? Would you be really interested to look at that particular person? Or if a student has worked in a corporate, what would be your preference
Right.
while recruitment?
Right. See, first of all, on the education system side, I have not done an MBA, so I can't really comment on what quality of education MBA schools are providing. But in general, in education, I see a lot of criticism of education system, right? But I don't buy into that argument a whole lot, because I feel in our times, you have to be a lifelong learner. So as part of your education system, you should have learned how to learn, and that's it. Like, did they teach me this course or that course, and this course is useless and that course is useful, and this is not useful for life and that is useful for life. All that I don't buy. I mean, in some sense, if today somebody is so sure that, like somebody who is in, 10th standard or 11th or in engineering, 20 years down the line, what they will be doing, they are just lying, right? Or they are
Yeah, yeah.
smoking something. I mean, you can't be
Absolutely.
sure about such things. So education should be very generic, and it should provide you the base and the structure and how to think. That is what should be the concern, and not like, is it useful and all that. That is, you don't get too much into the usefulness of each and every bits and bits learned.
Sure.
That would be my thing. Now the second question on when I'm hiring. So in a startup, clearly, like you mentioned, there is this thing that we don't have bandwidth to handhold, right? So it has to be that the person is a self-starter and the person is not looking for instructions. As in, like normally in a bigger company, what will happen is, okay, this is your goal for the year. And then every week and so in a one-on-one meeting with the manager, your uh, like instructions are given, do it this or do it that way and all that. We would want people who can figure it out a little bit. Of course, there are some discussions that would happen and some high level uh, goals can be set. However, what we would want, that the person is a self-starter and figure it out themselves. So one good indicator of that is the person tried to start a startup earlier.
Okay.
Okay, so that would be a good indicator. If you work in a startup also, especially if it is a small startup, right? So startup also, that you have to, like Flipkart would also be known as a startup, but I think after maybe 2013, 14, whoever joined Flipkart and whoever joined IBM, probably they did the same thing,
Sure.
right? So you have to figure out what was for example, if I'm trying to figure out, how to approach this market. I know that this company has done it before me. Now, the current employee of that company doesn't know that. The
Mm,
current employee who joined recently, the guy who started that journey, he would know more,
absolutely.
right? So because once things have been figured out by a particular company, then it becomes very prescriptive, because once you have figured out, you want it that way, that you don't want to lose out on the process, that you have figured out the process. Now you want to really scale. And if you are at a stage where you are not looking for scale, you are like looking for the next guy in this segment or the next customer in that segment, then you don't want to depend on somebody who can only work on a prescriptive thing, right? And ideally people who challenge you also, so that because you have your own set of ideas which are not right, and you have to be challenged by others, or who are intellectually honest and intellectually curious, right? So
Sure.
they would be the type of people who, even if they say, this is the right thing to do and it turns out wrong, they'll be fine with it.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with it. Or they would be interested in figuring it out, right? So that is those the type of. So I feel in startup it is less about skill, more about attitude. That especially if you're hiring junior, fresh graduates and such, that is the attitude of I'll figure it out, and um, and another thing is, you will do a lot of things that will not work out, right? You can't get depressed about it. That is the other thing. Normally in a big company, you do thing and something happens, whether the company makes money or not, nobody cares. But yeah, I got a good rating and somebody felt that the project was completed. Those are the metrics that matter. Here, we would go one level further, right? That it actually fell flat in the market means it's not useful. So
Absolutely.
such,
Absolutely.
right? So that is you have to be open-minded in these things. That just because I start, it was my idea, I did it. It has, I can't give it up. Such things won't be useful
Absolutely.
in a start.
Absolutely. Amazing, amazing views. Thank you, Shiva. I will just mention a couple of lines for the business school community, especially the MBA students who are about to graduate. I did my MBA, and this is a personal experience that I'm relating. So basically, I completed my MBA from EDEC Business School in France, and we had a 4-month period in which I could do a 2-month internship and I could do a 2-month kind of an MBA project. And I started on an MBA project that ultimately culminated in the form of my edtech startup, which I started in 2015, early 2015, when I came back to India. And one thing, and you have touched upon all of these aspects, Shiva, when you mentioned that there are amazing things to be learned in sales, marketing. I had my career started with IDC, so the exposure was amazing. But when I started my own company, that was the real exposure for me in terms of sales and business development. That really opened up the doors. That really opened up the confidence levels that I had. So I was giving, I had become very skilled at public speaking during those 1.5 years that I ran the company for. So that was an amazing experience. I became very proficient in sales. All the hesitation that was there earlier, that moved out. So I became quite proficient in sales as well. I had to shut down the company in 2016 because of financing issues. But if I look back and if I consider whether starting that company was a real mistake for me or not, I don't think that was a mistake, because that has given me amazing confidence. That has given me a lot of skills in marketing, digital marketing, sales. I hired about 10 odd interns as well. So that gave me, the amazing insight on working with different teams, hiring teams, leading teams. So all of that experience is something that is still very, very relevant for me during my current stint as well. So I would really request the business school students to consider projects or look at entrepreneurship during the time that they are in business schools, because the risk factor that is there when they are still studying, it is slightly on the lower side. It is relatively lower. So let's say you start your entrepreneurship project or venture maybe about 6 or 7 months before you're about to graduate. Then you have a fair amount of lead time for you to test the idea, start this particular thing, and get some initial traction if possible. So in that way, you're covering a part of the risk factor as well. So that is what I personally believe in. And I always encourage the business school students. So this is all that I have for the conversation today. Shiva, thank you so much for your time. It has been a great pleasure
Yes,
as
thanks.
always.
Thanks, Sandeep. Like I said earlier, it is always great to talking to you.
Thank you so much, Shiva. Have a nice day. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.